This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com, where today we are previewing Week 17 in the NFL with Brandon Gdula of numberFire, breaking down the NFL model he has been building and also his favorite bets for Week 17. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Dr. Ed Feng. You can find his work over at thepowerrank.com. Ed, Week 17 is on tap. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Trying to figure out who's going to play with some vigor this week and, who might not. So, Week 17 is always interesting. So we'll see. I don't think this year is going to be any different.
One of the teams that does have to play, with something on the line is Washington. But Washington just released the guy who started their Week 16 game, Dwayne Haskins. And some vindication for Dr. Eric Eager, who was not super high on Haskins coming out. That certainly has played out well for him. I think that was in part based on the play for Dr. Eric Eager. And a lot of the Haskins stuff was based on off-the-field stuff. But that aside, it is wild that Haskins, that situation was so bad that they released him, despite the fact Alex Smith is still not healthy, and the only guy they have on their roster outside of him is a guy who was taking online classes and was Washington's quarantine quarterback a couple weeks ago. It's crazy that the situation got so bad that they flat out released him with a must-win game coming up this week.
Yeah, I've heard things like it was a way of it was kind of a power grab by Rivera or whatnot, but clearly Haskins was having issues both on and off the field. So yeah, it's kind of a weird time to give up on the guy. At least he's useful as a backup if Alex Smith could play. But I guess you're going with the practice squad, the quarantine quarterback.
Yeah, the quarantine quarterback, a phrase we never thought we'd use, but is now hyper relevant here in Week 17. So that tosses some extra funkiness into the equation here. And we're going to talk about the funkiness with Brandon Gdula. If you are a regular FanDuel Podcast Network listener, you know that Brandon is my co-host on Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, our daily fantasy podcast. We're going to talk NFL modeling from a betting perspective with Brandon for Week 17, talk about motivation, talking about weeding out most relevant samples, and get his favorite bets for Week 17. You can follow Brandon on Twitter at Gdula13. If you're listening on earlier than Friday, make sure you check out our college football betting preview with Drew Martin. We had him on to preview the college football semifinals, talking Alabama, Notre Dame, and Ohio State, Clemson. Drew also had some thoughts on other bowl games. You can find that by searching for Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and review as well. Make sure you are subscribed because we'll have podcasts into the postseason. We'll talk the college football national championship game as well as the playoffs later on as well. Still a lot of good stuff coming your way throughout the year for the Covering the Spread with the NFL and college football. Now, before we get to Brandon for Week 17, we got to go back to last week. We had Drew Dinsick on to preview Week 16 in the NFL, and it was a weird week where a lot of bad news broke against us.
Covering the past.
All right, last week here on Covering the Spread, we had Drew Dinsick on to preview Week 16. Check him out on the Deep Dive podcast and find him on Twitter at whale_capper. He started things off on Friday. He wanted the under for Vikings Saints at 51.5, and it closed at 50. The Saints actually hit the over by themselves. What a way to start the week, and pretty telling for how things went for us across the board in Week 16. They won 52-33. Alvin Kamara scored 6 times. Could have scored a 7th time. Drew Brees said that Alvin Kamara was on his son's fantasy football team. Wish I'd known that beforehand, Drew. Thanks for the tip, man. Appreciate it. So
exactly.
This is just wild stuff.
I know. I have a friend that had Alvin Kamara all year, and then he scores the 6 touchdowns this week when he's not in the final or semifinal or whatever it was for his fantasy league. So
there is an industry-wide league called the Scott Fish Bowl where it's I think 1,200 or 1,400 teams, and you have conferences and stuff like that, and you keep advancing. I made it to the semifinals and dropped a total dud there. I think I got negative points out of Mike Glennon, which is not usually how you want to play things. And so I got eliminated. But I had Alvin Kamara, and I also had, I think I had Mike Evans. He also went for 40 points this past week.
Listed,
and It would have been nice, but it was not to be done. So Alvin Kamara scoring a lot of points in a non-relevant way for me in that one. On Saturday, Drew had the Cardinals minus 4.5 against San Francisco. He talked about how the 49ers didn't really care. They were sending their guys home for Christmas because they'd been stuck in Arizona for so long, and the market agreed because that one closed at 6. So 1.5 points movement in favor of Drew there. And it did move, but the Cardinals just played bad. Kyler Murray got hurt again. 49ers won that one 20-12. I think the handicap and the thought process was right, and the market agreed with him, but, the Cardinals just kind of sucked in that game.
Yeah. They couldn't stop San Francisco, the run game. So, everything kind of went bad there.
Yeah, it was, again, emblematic of how the whole week went for us. It was just a weird week. Later that day, Drew was on the over for the Raiders and Dolphins at 47.5. This one did break well. Closed at 50, so a lot of movement in his favor there. The Raiders got to the over with 19 seconds left by kicking a field goal. They decided not to go for the touchdown, kicked a field goal. I'm sure Drew was pleased as punch with John Gruden for doing that. But then the Dolphins spun a miracle to push it even higher, finished at 51 points. So a win for Drew there. I don't know. I think what John Gruden said after was that the odds that they push down the field and score in those final 19 seconds weren't that high. So? I think the thought process, I can understand it, but it doesn't mean I agree with it.
I don't know if I agree. So live when I was watching it, I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But I think in the postmortem, obviously, you don't want to have some kind of confirmation bias because Miami came down and I don't know how Fitzmagic pulled through that pass right on the money with his head getting twerked like that. But think about it this way, right? You want to run the clock down, so you take a knee, right? But you would actually run a couple more seconds off if you ran a run play just right up the middle. Right. And it doesn't have to be fancy. If you don't get it, whatever, you kick the field goal. I think it's kind of inexcusable to not try for a touchdown.
I think the very interesting component to this, too, is that the Dolphins said afterwards they were trying to let the Raiders score. So that says to me that the Dolphins had a similar thought process. They wanted to maximize time rather than the points.
But still, I understand that the Raiders' defense isn't that good, but if you can't hold Miami the length of the field for a touchdown within a minute,
right?
Probably don't deserve to win the game.
It did take a miracle to break things that way, but that can happen against that defense. So I don't know. It's I understand where he was coming from, but it's very easy to question that in retrospect, and it ended the Raiders season. So it kept the Dolphins alive for Week 17 as well. I'd love to watch them in the playoffs personally. I might be the only one, but I think they're a fascinating team. So I might be alone on this island, but I think they're great. Both Drew and you had interest in the Rams-Seahawks. Drew had the over at 47.5. You had the Rams plus 1.5, and the spread did close right there. The total moved up a half point. But the Rams' offense was rough. Jared Goff got hurt, which was just great. Didn't help either of you there. So the Seahawks won a low-scoring game 20-9. Just another weird game. And it's so hard to figure out this dumb Rams team that I want to like, and a lot of numbers have liked for a long time, but they have these stupid clunker games that just they're very hard to predict where they come from.
Yeah, exactly. We have teams like the Rams and Tampa Bay that kind of go from week to week, and there's not much consistency. It didn't help that the Rams couldn't punch it in when they were on the 1 yard line. I actually think they had more yards than the Seahawks, so it's not like it's not like it was a lopsided game by any stretch. But frustrating one. So.
Yeah, the thumb injury did not help either with Goff in the third quarter. I was on the wrong side of late-breaking COVID news, so we all just had a blast this weekend. I had the over on 47.5 for the Jets and the Browns, and the thought process for me was that the Jets offense would be able to score points, and they did. They put up 23 themselves, so that's good. But the Browns are missing their top 4 wide receivers due to COVID. I knew their right guard would be out. Wyatt Teller sounded like he'd be out the whole time, so I was accounting for that. But then on Sunday, their left tackle gets ruled out too. So the Browns played this game without their top 4 wide receivers, without their left tackle, and none of which was known at the time. the game still could have gone over if the Browns had moved the ball. Like, if they had scored on their final drive, it would have brought the game to 46 points, and it would have gone to overtime. As long as it's not a tie, I would have still gotten the over at 47.5. Baker fumbled, finished at just 39 points, so a brutal week across the board, and I want week 16 to fade off into the abyss as quickly as possible, just wash our mouths of whatever that nonsense was, and move on to, I'm sure, what will be an equally frustrating week 17.
Yeah, well, at least Drew gave us one winner, so we can, at least we have that.
We weren't fully blanked. Just that Jets game, man, it was so dumb. But regardless, kudos to the Jets, I guess, on not getting Trevor Lawrence. You did it. Congratulations there. We're going to try to move forward to Week 17 here in just 1 second. But first, with the college football playoff on the horizon, FanDuel Sportsbook is making sure you have the opportunity to get in on the action with the best possible odds. Right now, new users can wager up to $5 on any team to advance to the national championship game at plus 2,500 odds. That is right, a $5 bet on Clemson, Notre Dame, Alabama, or Ohio State can win you $125 on New Year's Day. The semifinal games are just a few days away, so download the FanDuel Sportsbook app and make your first deposit to see the enhanced odds today. Must be 21 plus and present in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Colorado, West Virginia, Tennessee, or Indiana. New users only. Must wager on the designated boost market. Deposit required. Max bonus $125. See full terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Or in Colorado, call 1-800-522-4700. In West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. In Indiana, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT. Or in Tennessee, call the Tennessee Red Line 1-800-889-9789. Let's bring on Brandon Gdula right now. He is the managing editor of numberFire.com. We're going to talk Week 17 in the NFL and get his thoughts on where we can find some betting value in what figures to be a wild week.
Covering the present.
Let's bring Brandon Gdula into covering the spread to preview Week 17 in the NFL. Brandon, it is strange to talk to you on this podcast as opposed to our other one. How you doing today?
Yeah, I feel like an intruder here. This isn't our territory.
This is like when your high school friends meet your college friends. Like, I know you've talked to Ed because we've had you on the podcast before, but it's like it's that weird crossover where you're like, oh man, like is Ed gonna hate my friends? Is Brandon gonna hate my friends? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm just very nervous. Like, I got to make sure you two interact well.
Yeah, I'll pretend like I have both high school and college friends for the sake of this example.
I don't think that's your problem. We've done this before.
Exactly. We had Brandon on to talk golf. Yeah.
We were out, at that party. So this is like the second coming of meeting college versus me, the high school friend, I guess.
Exactly. So we got to get Brandon in here to talk some NFL. We had Adam on to talk golf previously. And Brandon, what better time to have you on than Week 17 where nothing really matters? At least there are some games that are up in the air here. But initial thoughts for you on Week 17, at least looking at things. This at least to me, there's not a ton to like from a betting perspective. Are you getting kind of a similar vibe from this one?
Yeah, especially if you come at it from like a data and modeling standpoint, because it's really hard to adjust for motivation level and determination and what teams want to do. Honestly, I would like have the Jets worse like toward the end of the season, but they're on a 2-game win streak. So, anytime I don't really have a good feel from something from a data standpoint, the good part about betting is you don't have to bet every game. So
yeah,
that's always helpful.
Well, Brandon, we had you on Talk Golf before. I know you've been working on a college basketball model, which maybe we can talk about at some point as well later on, but also you're building on an NFL model. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners have thought about this too, trying to build out their own NFL models to, streamline their process from a betting perspective in the future. But you've been going through that process recently. And I wanted to have you on here to talk about what that's been like. What are some key components for you in building out this NFL model that you wanted to make sure were included in order to make sure you were focusing on the right predictive metrics?
Yeah, so the first modeling I ever did was for golf, and I was thinking about it. It's like a weirdly good corollary with the NFL if you think about it from an underlying data standpoint, because If you study up on recent form in golf, you often look at finishing positions, but those aren't really the best way to identify recent performance because you can look past that. You can look at strokes gain data relative to the field. You can adjust that for field strength. It's harder to do that with an 8th place finish. With football, there's wins and losses. There's points for, points against, but even those can be misleading if you don't look a step further. What's a touchdown worth if your defense forced a turnover on the opponent's 30? What if your team's primarily putting up all those points in the fourth quarter in garbage time? And what if your team puts up a solid point total, like 24, 27, against a team that's allowing 17 or 18 per game? So that all matters. It's not groundbreaking, but it's important. So the big thing I focus on when I do any modeling is I want to adjust somehow for opponent strength, for field strength in golf, but for football, it's opponent strength to some degree, and also look at more predictive stats than just descriptive stats. So that leads me to numberFire's expected points model. I'm sure you talk about that a lot, but if anyone's kind of new to an expected points model, I think the easiest way to think about it is ask yourself, what's better, a 5-yard gain or a 10-yard gain? The answer is actually that it depends. If the 5-yard gain is on 3rd and 2nd, moves the sticks, it's a better play than gaining 10 yards on 3rd and 15. One of those increases expected scoring significantly, gets you a new set of downs. So that's kind of the purpose of a good expected points model. So with that in mind, I adjust each team's passing and rushing output against opponent expectation to figure out who's doing better than expected or not. And, yes, expected points don't count on the scoreboard, but they can tell us what should have happened over a large sample. Fluky touchdowns, getting good field position, that's all accounted for in a good expected points model. And nowadays, anyone can get access to an EP model with NFL Scraper, NFL Faster. Pro Football Reference even has one. It's a little more, you can just go right there and kind of tabulate things manually. So, I don't even account for yardage or actual points, but it's all the underlying data to figure out actual expected points. So to conclude, basically what I look for is opponent adjustments, and caring more about the underlying data than the actual points per game allowed, which can be kind of misleading.
I want to stick on this for a second because you talked about comparing it to golf and talked about current form in golf. Do you weight more heavily more recent games when it comes to your NFL stuff, or is it more looking at full season numbers? Because it is inherently a small sample in the NFL.
Yeah, it's always a small sample, even if you break it down on a per play basis. We're looking at 1,000-ish plays, give or take for a team over a full season. And if you're projecting something out, let's say week 8, it's 500 give or take plays. So it's a small sample. If it's not adjusted for opponents, anything like that, it can be really difficult. So I find it hard to kind of break that down even more whenever we're looking at a 16-game sample at best. The best sample you can really get is 15 games going into week 17, and we know that there's a lot of issues with that. So for me, I do, I kind of take a cue from you, Jim. I'm looking at a most relevant sample. So I know you're going to ask me about some of these games for this weekend, and I think the most relevant sample at a high level is, what do these teams do when a certain quarterback is starting? I think that's the most impactful, looking at passing offense, passing defense, rushing offense, rushing defense. Two of those matter a lot more than the other two, and they're both passing related. So I think quarterbacks tell us more than anything, how a team might play.
Excellent. So when you're using numberFire's metrics, I thought the opponent adjustments were already built in with the net expected points that is on the site. Is that true, or are you doing something above and beyond that?
It's true. We do have adjusted net expected points on the site, but I adjusted a different way for myself. We also have raw unadjusted net expected points. So, anyone can just go to the site and look up some opponent adjusted net expected points data, but I do it a little bit differently. And it's just something that I've been messing with. I would be surprised if it's that significantly different. The reason that I wanted to do it is break it down and find an actual expected points, as in not net expected points, but an expected actual on-field points per play, and kind of run that regression and figure things out from there.
Well, I think the reason that's helpful that you're doing it yourself too is because numberFire's metrics don't do it on a player level basis. It's just for teams. So like for the Bears, for example, you can look at Mitchell Trubisky's schedule adjusted net expected points number. Whereas if you look at the Bears, that includes Nick Foles. Is that kind of part of the reason for you too, so you can actually get it on a more player specific level?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And like I said, in projecting out any games, what I do, the only real adjustments I make are looking at anytime there's a very relevant or very obvious discrepancy, such as a Trubisky versus Nick Foles, and compare the Bears' offensive output in games started by Trubisky and started by Foles, and figure things out from there. So that's basically what I do it for primarily.
Excellent. Let's talk about some games. Somehow we're in week 17 and the Cowboys can still make the playoffs. They're at the Giants. They're a 3-point favorite, actually. And the total is 44.5. They had a pretty good showing last week against the Eagles. What do you see happening in this game?
So, yeah, I mean, the Cowboys had a big showing in that week 16 game, and, Andy Dalton was really good. He was the primary reason for it. Almost 22 expected points added from his dropbacks as a passer. And based on how the Eagles have played all season, that should have been closer to like 6. And yes, they lost Fletcher Cox, but for me, it's really hard to get granular to that degree. So I can't factor that in because I can't factor that in for every single individual defensive player. And sometimes we see, the first thing that comes to mind with trying to predict things out from a defensive player standpoint is that cornerback stats, like coverage stats, they're not that sticky year to year, even week to week. So I think that sometimes we can get a little overboard in predicting how a team will play with or without somebody. But also for the Cowboys, it wasn't really just the past week that they've played well. I have them as the 12th best adjusted offense since week 11 when Andy Dalton returned to the lineup. It's more reasonable, 18th overall in all of his starts. But if you look at his past 6 games, he's had 4 of those with at least 0.2 passing net expected points per dropback, the NFL average being 0.13. The Giants are just 21st in adjusted pass defense this season. So I think there are still reasons to believe in the Cowboys offense. And as Jim knows, they do have Michael Gallup, who is just a top-tier wide receiver.
The best receiver in football, naturally. So obviously you have to account for that here. We talked about the Giants' defense on the show before, where they're built weird. They emphasize stopping the run. They don't really care about the pass, and it's the same thing on offense for them. And it's just kind of not a great composition. I think that puts them in a tough spot here with this Cowboys offense, like you alluded to, playing well. So once you adjust your numbers to account for the Cowboys in their current state, specifically with Dalton as their starter, what are your numbers saying about this game, whether it be the spread or the total? Are you seeing any value in these numbers?
Not a lot of value. That's one of the reasons that I started with golf instead of NFL, because I find NFL lines to be pretty efficient very often. My model predicted the over-under to be 45.2, so 1.7 points off the pace. The spread prediction was 1.3 for the Cowboys, a difference of about 1.3 points there. The Giants in games started by Daniel Jones rate out as 28th in my adjusted offensive efficiency metric, but they've also underperformed from a points per play standpoint in these games a little bit. So it's kind of one of those spots where if you look at the actual points per play versus the expected points per play, there is a discrepancy there. And using their points per play in that sample, the over, under, and spread are projectable within about 0.2 in my model. So I think it's very close there. So I think this might be one of those spots where it does help to look at that underlying data. So with that said, if I had to bet this, it would actually be on the Giants to cover the spread. I don't personally think there's enough there for me to love it, but that is where I see the most value based on my model.
Yeah, this is a tough week trying to find some value. So a lean towards the Giants +3, but not one you're willing to fire on. Let's talk here about the Packers and the Bears. One of the few games this week where, in addition to the Giants and the Cowboys, where both teams need a win, and it's not one that includes John Wolford versus potentially like Brett Hundley or something. The Packers, 5.5-point favorites here. The total is 50.5, and I think the Bears topic is interesting here because of Trubisky. They've been playing a lot better recently, but a big part of the reason they've been playing better is schedule related. So when you look at this Bears offense and what you would deem to be their most relevant sample, what do your numbers say about them right now?
So they're operating at about a top 8 level in terms of points per play since Mitchell Trubisky's return. Despite the schedule, they're actually outperforming expectation. But only just barely. And as far as the passing net expected points go, they've been about 6 points below the expected pace. So they've really been boosted by the opponents that they've played in the stretch. Trubisky's a bit inflated right now at the moment. They've been just barely above the NFL average in Trubisky starts overall, based on the data that I look at. But it's actually mostly from rushing and not passing, which is something Trubisky helps with. But as a passer, he's not necessarily playing above the expectation that he should be based on his opponents. So I'd have to lean more toward some negative regression, I should say, for Trubisky in the offense based on the fact that they're playing a top 12 adjusted pass defense this week. So I'm a little bit down on the Bears right now.
How much of a gap do you see between the numbers with Foles and the numbers with Trubisky? Do you think that it's worthwhile to throw out the full season numbers because Trubisky's – you don't have to pull up the actual stuff, but like – do you think that it's worthwhile to throw out the Bears' full season numbers and focus on just Trubisky, or is the gap small enough where we can still factor in the full season stuff?
For me, I like to kind of separate that out because surprisingly, Foles has just been substantially worse than Trubisky this season, based on the data that I see. So I do think this is one of those spots where, you can look at the full season. It's the larger sample of the two, but is it the more relevant sample? Probably not. So I think a big question with NFL betting and modeling is how much do you adjust for a small sample? What is the most relevant sample? What's the most predictive sample? And that can be pretty tricky.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough one. All right, so once you boil that down, any value here on either the spread or the total with 50.5 as the total and 5.5 as the spread?
So the Bears won this game in about 39% of my simulations with an expected spread of 4.6 points for the Packers if I use the data during Trubisky starts. But if I use the full season data, the expected spread is 5.6 points, which is nearly identical now to the actual spread. So I don't think I can go as far as to anticipate a Bears win, but it should be fairly tight. I think it should allow them to cover. So if I had to pick a side right now, it would be the Bears to cover. That's where I would lean.
Awesome. So we're in a state where we actually have to ask you about not one, but two NFC East games. Philadelphia. Washington's a 1-point favorite with a pretty low total of 42.5. Washington actually released Dwayne Haskins this week, which was kind of a surprise when your other quarterback is still hurt. Alex Smith may or may not play. What do you see happening in this game?
Yeah, I mean, with Alex Smith, anyway, he's not been particularly good. His passing and expected points numbers are well off the league average, so that's a problem. It doesn't kind of matter who they start. I think they have offensive problems, but the Eagles are now eliminated, so it's one of those. How do you factor that in a model? To the degree that the Eagles will play at their peak. In-game started by Smith, they're 25th in my model in expected points per play in that sample. So that's kind of tough, to believe in this offense. They've been kind of inflated for me all season. Not that they're anybody's pick to be the best offense in the league or anything like that. But I've had a hard time believing in them for most of the season because of their quarterback play.
Yeah, and that's justifiable given the way things have gone. Does sound like Alex Smith will play. So when you look at this number under the assumption that Alex Smith plays, any betting value for you on either Washington minus 1.5 or the total here 42.5? Eagles playing spoiler at all or not so much?
Yeah, so using full season data, the spread and the total are virtually identical to what my model would have predicted. The model's initial prediction for the total was 42.3 points with a 1.3 point advantage for the football team. So pretty much identical both sides. But if you look at the sample with Jalen Hurts at quarterback and with Alex Smith at quarterback, it rates out as about a pick'em, but the total is a bit higher at 46 points projected. So it comes down to, can we trust the smaller samples here or not? And there's also the question, like, how do you view motivation for the Eagles versus a win in a clinch for Washington? So given that, I'd have to go with the football team outright, but I'd honestly be most inclined to bet the over, honestly.
Okay, so over 42.5 for Washington against Philly on Sunday Night Football. For Brandon, any other games where you see some value for Week 17? Like we said, it's tough to view it from a modeling perspective. I guess before we talk about that, are you Like, are you inclined to bet games where you don't know the motivation, or do you think that those are kind of frightening for you in trying to judge things like that?
The way that I do things is I will just stay away. I'm okay with that. There's a lot of other stuff that I like to model out, and I have plenty of options to bet. Golf's going to come back soon, so I don't personally feel the pressure to have action on every game, especially whenever it's less about hey, this game projects very close to the lines that I'm seeing, and more, I don't know what to expect from a motivation standpoint.
Okay, so with that in mind, anything else standing out to you for Week 17?
So you guys picked out like the three of the most relevant playoff situations. Looking at the other games where there's something relevant on both sides, we have Buffalo and Miami, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, but the Steelers are starting Mason Rudolph, so that's kind of tough. But Miami needs a win, and if that happens and the Steelers win or tie, the Bills will become the 3 seeds. So both games are at 1 p.m. So maybe the Bills do play a little bit harder. That's just a tough situation. But in looking at that game, with games started by Tua Tagovailoa, the anticipated over/under for me is 47.4. The actual total is 47.5, so that checks out. The anticipated spread, though, 2.4 for the Bills rather than 4.5. And given that uncertainty and motivation for Buffalo, the importance of this game for the Dolphins, I'd probably be very inclined to get Miami plus 4.5.
Yeah, so if you can find Miami still listed, there's been some funkiness with that game recently because once the Steelers announced that Mason Rudolph was going to start, the Bills numbers kind of went wild. So if you can still find a number on the Dolphins, I think I'd agree. I was running my numbers in that game, and they also agreed to bet Miami. But it depends on if that book it's still listed at your book, because that one's been kind of all over the map the past couple hours.
And I do have another. This one's less of a model prediction and more of a sort of a gut thing, but also
special.
It's based a little bit, it's based a lot in the model, but also just kind of, football's tough because there's the model and then there's the eye test and just kind of, that. So it's like golf a lot more than it should be. It's very volatile on like something like basketball, but I would say the over for the Titans and Texans at 56. It's a very high total, but both teams are top 10 in expected points per play in my model, the Titans being second. We just saw the Texans get lit up by the Bengals. And, on the other side of things, Deshaun Watson's still playing good football based on the expected points data. The Titans had scored 30-plus on their own in 5 straight before their snow game against the Packers. But the Texans are no Packers defensively. There were 72 total points before overtime in their first matchup. The Titans have nearly clinched the playoffs. They're about 94% likely to make it, but they can actually slide. They can be the 4 seed, they can be the 7 seed, so anywhere. So they should have some motivation. That should probably play out in through scoring points against the Texans, who should probably be able to put some points up themselves.
Over under 40 FanDuel points for Derrick Henry.
That's close. I'd put her about 33, 34.
For the median projection, 33, 34?
Sure.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure we were on the same page there. That is Brandon Gdula. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Gdula13 and check out our DFS podcast recording tomorrow on Wednesday at 10 a.m. for Week 17, talking playoff motivation. We'll talk plenty about Texans and Titans there as well. Brandon, we appreciate the time. Thank you so much. Good luck to you in Week 17, both with your bets and with your DFS lineups. We'll talk to you again soon to get some college basketball or some PGA thoughts once again.
Thanks, guys. It's always fun.
Covering the future.
Big thank you once again to Brandon Gdula for swinging by and breaking down Week 17 in the NFL. You can find him on Twitter at Gdula13 and check out our DFS podcast going up tomorrow to break down Week 17 in DFS. And it sounds like Brandon uses a similar method to you, Ed, when it comes to quarterbacks, where he's just viewing teams as being different teams. And I think that's probably the right way to handle things because of how important the quarterback position is, first of all, but also how different teams can be operating under different guys.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my method is more using market data, and then you kind of get the game as a unit, and you just, the market knows who's going to start, and that's the opinion that had of the game. It doesn't really matter if that guy got hurt during that game or whatnot. There's still an opinion. So, yeah, that's what I do. I think it's pretty important. It's an important part of making adjustments. I've been just this past week trying to figure out how to weight things more appropriately, because once you get a decent sample of games with the markets, like Nick Mullins for San Francisco, I kind of go back to my original model, but with that being the market component of it as well. So, and then there's a question of how do you phase it in, when you only have like 3 or 4 games, which you have with like Alex Smith and Jalen Hurts in the Washington versus Philadelphia game. So, so I think it's a good thing to do. I'm still working on it. And I think these adjustments will be more and more important.
Yeah, and they are proving as relevant as ever with, I think they showed a stat that it's been 12 or 11 different quarterbacks who started a game for the NFC East. I think it'll be 12 potentially on Sunday if Taylor Heineke starts. So obviously we need to be making these adjustments when it comes to quarterback play.
Well,
let's move into – go ahead.
And another thing I want to mention is, we got through big parts of the season without many QB injuries. Obviously Dak went down and Nick Mullins was playing for Jimmy G, but it's only been the last couple of weeks where it's, sit down Monday afternoon and just figure out what's going back with the quarterback situation. Because obviously you have to change the data depending on who's starting.
Right.
So, So there's all that goodness.
Yeah, just a fun time all around, making our job so much easier, but with all this complicated news. Let's move into covering the future for Week 17. And Ed, you want to talk about that Bills versus Dolphins game, and it's tough to diagnose because we don't really know right now what the Bills are going to do. That number is down at quite a number of places. It's down at FanDuel Sportsbook right now, but what are you seeing about this game when we factor in the uncertainty when it comes to the Bills?
Yeah, so when I was prepping for this podcast this week, I was like, well, of course. I mean, there is an issue of motivation, but I didn't think it was a particularly big deal. So Buffalo's made the playoffs, and they're playing for seeding. If they win, they would have the tiebreaker. They would clinch the number 2 seed. In most years, that means a week off, which means a lot, right? To get a week off. That's not the case this year with the extra wild card game. So it doesn't have as much, but I still think they had plenty to play for. Miami clearly has a lot to play for as well, because they have yet to clinch a playoff spot. So, and when you look at these two teams, you have Josh Allen continuing to astound everyone this season. He had a dominant performance against New England. I can't imagine how great it must feel for that Buffalo franchise to pound the crap out of a New England team that's been just abusing them for so many years. But we had talked about Josh Allen in the past. I was not a believer at the beginning of the year, but there's really no way to not acknowledge what this guy has done. When I look at adjusted success rate on passing plays, the Bills are first. So they've been great. The defense hasn't been as solid. They've been 23rd when I look at adjusted success rate, but at least they have they have it right in that they're better against the pass than the run. When you look at Miami, they're just kind of meh on both sides of the ball by my numbers. The offense is 13th by my adjusted success rate as they continue yo-yo back between Tua Tagovailoa and Ryan Fitzpatrick. The defense is also league average right at 16th. So, Buffalo's the better team. They're playing at home. They have the better quarterback situation. So if they're going to play their stars, if they're going to compete for that number 2 seed, I would definitely take them. I've seen some 3s, 3.5s, 4, even at 4.5. I like Buffalo in this game.
So basically what you're saying is keep an eye on the market. If the book you are using puts the number back up for the Bills and the Dolphins, and we get word that the Bills are going to take this game seriously, you're looking for a 3 or a 4 if you can get it out there for this Bills team?
Yeah, if you can get a 3, that'd be great. I mean, my model likes the Bills by 5.7 points in this game to give you an idea.
Okay, so keep a close eye on your book of choice, or books preferably of choice. Try to see if you can get a number for Bills versus Dolphins. If we get word the Bills will be taking this game seriously, playing guys like Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, etc., try to get the Bills and see what number you can get, because Ed's numbers do like the Bills there. My cover in the future is in a game that is posted, thankfully, because both teams are motivated to win, and I want the Packers minus 5.5. And at one point, it seemed like there might be motivation issues for the Packers here, but they have not yet locked up the 1 seed for a first-round bye, and that's a situation where you are going to push, and they won't know by kickoff if they have it. So the Packers are going to take this game seriously and play all out, and they've got a lot to play for here, so I think that laying 5.5 with them against Chicago is the right way to go. This is a two-part analysis, and the first one is that Green Bay is I think they're a really good team personally. They rank first in schedule-adjusted offense, according to numberFire's metrics. The defense, not as good, which is a risk when you're laying 5.5, because there is some backdoor potential, the potential for them to let Chicago back in the game. But the offensive gap here should be pretty huge. The second part about this is that I still am skeptical of Chicago's offense because, yes, they've been awesome recently. They've been putting down some big point totals, but the defenses they have faced have been absolutely wretched. The past 4 weeks, here are the rankings of the defenses the Bears have faced in order. They are 32nd, 31st, 24th, and 29th. They have faced 3 of the 4 worst first defenses in all of football. The Packers aren't great, but they rank 12th defensively, largely because of what they can do against the pass. And we've already seen what they can do, even with Trubisky back at quarterback, because Trubisky's first game back in the starting role was in Week 12 against this very same Packers defense. And in that game, the Packers were up 27-10 at halftime. They were up 41-10 entering the fourth quarter. The Bears did get some garbage time points in, but they still lost that game by 16 points. This one's in Chicago. That does help them quite a bit, but I don't know how much the Chicago offense has truly improved. Like, playing well against these defenses is great, but I'm still skeptical they could do so against a average-ish defense, we'll call them, for the Packers here. After accounting for schedule, they're still numberFire's 28th ranked offense. That does include the time with Nick Foles, so I would not put them 28th, obviously. I think if you put Trubisky in there, it's a lot better than that, but I don't think they'll be able to move the ball as effectively this time around against Green Bay. And Brandon mentioned that even with Trubisky, in this small sample, they have been below average offense passing. So the Packers have a lot to play for here. They are much better, I think, overall than this Bears team. So give me Green Bay minus 5.5 on Sunday. But Ed, I do want to talk to you about this because obviously your numbers have a market opinion on Mitchell Trubisky at quarterback for the Chicago Bears. I'm sure that number has evolved over time, but what do they say about this Bears team under Trubisky?
Yeah, do you want to take a guess how much better or worse it is under Trubisky than Foles?
I would say now 2 points.
Okay, yeah. So my model, which obviously includes games earlier in the season, says a half point.
Okay.
So I was remarking for a long time when Foles was hurt and Trubisky was coming back, it didn't matter. It didn't even matter to make the adjustment in that part of my model because they were both essentially the same. With Trubisky, it's moved up a half point, but that's essentially what the opinion is.
Yeah, so not a huge difference. So I feel better about including the full season numbers there with Chicago's offense, and I think I feel pretty good about Green Bay laying some lumber on Sunday and laying 5.5. That is all the time that we have for today and for this week, but do not forget we're back again next week to talk the NFL playoffs. That should be a whole lot of fun, so make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. Also, once again, if you did not listen yesterday, make sure you go back and check out our chat with Drew Martin to preview the college football semifinals coming up on Friday. Also, a little a selfish Auburn Northwestern preview for Drew, or from Drew as well. Big thank you to Drew. Find him on Twitter at DrewMartinBets, and a big thank you as well to Brandon Gdula. You can find him on Twitter at Gdula13, GDULA13. Ed, what about you? What is cooking over at the Power Rank for this week?
Yeah, so please sign up for my free email newsletter. You get a sample of my best predictions, usually saved for paying members of the site. You can do that at thepowerrank.com. And if you want access to all of my best numbers, and if you want access to some of these games I talk about on Covering the Spread before you can get it on the podcast, that's all available to members. So check that out at thepowerrank.net.
All right, and Ed is on Twitter at The Power Rank. I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcasts. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you with your bets, whether it be for college football in the new year or for NFL Week 17. Have a fantastic new year. We'll talk to you once again in 2021 for the start of the NFL playoffs. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.